Good evening. We want to welcome everyone to a conversation with two school heads. We'll get started momentarily. We're just waiting for everyone to come into our virtual space. Well, I am so excited to welcome all of you to our conversation with two heads of schools, the state of all boys schools with myself and David Laurie. I'm going to turn it over to Sam Green, who is a board member and trustee of the Public Prep Network, to do formal introductions.
Thanks, Janelle. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to help put together this interesting event, which I think will lead to a very interesting conversation between David Laurie and Janelle Bradshaw. As Janelle mentioned, I am a trustee of the Public Prep Network, which is a group of single-sex charter schools, which Janelle runs as the CEO. We have actually single-sex boys schools and single-sex girls schools, so it's very exciting. Janelle brings perspective from both sides of the aisle, if you will. I am also a parent of two boys who are at Collegiate, which is a private school on the Upper West Side of New York, and kind of bring a unique perspective of being a collegiate parent and an involved trustee of a charter network. And it felt like Janelle and David, a conversation between the two of them could be quite interesting, while they are coming from different backgrounds and of different experiences, and serve different communities. Janelle and David have a shared mission, and that mission is the education of boys and girls in Janelle's context and Janelle's job, and preparing them for the future. Obviously, this has been a very complicated year with COVID. This isn't intended to be a COVID-centric conversation. It's really a conversation of leadership between David and Janelle. I really am not aware of any two other individuals or educators who've done more for their respective institutions than David and Janelle in this, in this difficult and sort of unprecedented time. And interestingly, they both started their jobs on exactly the same day. So they have a lot in common, even though they come from different places and different experiences. With that, I'll turn it over back to Janelle to introduce herself. I will note before she takes over that I've had the pleasure of knowing Janelle for about the last 6 years, around 4 to 5 of which she was the superintendent in charge of the educational piece, if you will, of the public prep network. And she was promoted to CEO in last summer of 2020 when she took over leadership of the network. And she's been a tremendous leader for us. And I look forward to continuing our work together. With that, Janelle, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much for those kind words and that introduction, and just your support in helping coordinate today's conversation. This idea and this notion of thinking about how to really educate boys for the purposes of tonight for the future is something that I'm really interested in and invested in. And I can't wait to learn from you, David, all of the things that you have to offer as you're leading Collegiate through these times. As Sam mentioned, I am Janelle Bradshaw, the CEO of Public Prep. We serve over 2,000 scholars, young women and men of bold intellect from pre-K through 8th grade across 5 schools in New York City, primarily in the Bronx and the Lower East Side. I am the proud CEO as of July 1st. I'm also a proud graduate of Smith College, and not that going to a single-sex college is the most important factor when you're working within single gender, but it has shaped who I am and changed the lifelong trajectory of my life. And I want to make sure that our kids who are coming from the poorest congressional districts have the opportunities that I had when I attended Smith and beyond. I'm really honored to be joined by my colleague in this work, the head of school at Collegiate, David Laurie.
Janelle, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation for this evening and to join you in this conversation about boys' schools, and just to talk about education in general is always a pleasure. And I appreciate everyone who is tuning in from cyberspace. We appreciate your engagement. And Sam, thank you as well for putting this together. As Janelle mentioned, I am the head of Collegiate School here on the Upper West Side. Collegiate serves 650 boys, K through 12, and we were founded in 1628, which I know as Janelle's shaking her head, a lot of people are amazed by that. It still amazes me, as a matter of fact. And we are the oldest independent school in the United States. And while I've spent most of my career in co-ed schools, I am a graduate of an all-boys school right outside of Boston called the Roxbury Latin School. And I also, for over a decade, attended an all-boys summer camp, which was also a very formative experience for me. So I have long experience in a single gender environment and how powerful it can be. And I'll also share a connection that Janelle and I have, and I have with Public Prep, is I did help to found and run a charter school in Florida many years ago, and it was a very powerful experience. And so I appreciate, first of all, the size of your network. I think it's amazing, all the children that you're serving, and I think it's just a wonderful educational opportunity for kids. So again, thank you for having me.
David, thank you. And these conversations have really been really great opportunities for me to connect with leaders in the field, such as yourself, but also for our community to have an opportunity to think about what is the impact of single-sex education, because we don't spend a lot of time talking about that. So I'm really excited to be talking about what this means for our young men that we are privileged to support throughout their time in our communities. As Sam said, we both started our job on July 1st, 2020. What a year to start a new job and a new role. It's certainly been unprecedented. We probably both use that term too much in letters. But I'm certainly would love to hear, what are some lessons that you've learned in your first year as head of school at Collegiate? What have you found to be the most rewarding, and what's been the most challenging?
Well, and I know that we talked about this a little bit before, and Sam mentioned it in his opening remarks, is we could spend probably the entire hour talking about COVID, and we promise not to do that. But certainly that has presented, I think, the greatest challenge this year when it comes to educating the students, and how much in terms of resources and energy that takes, and the health impacts, and of course the social emotional wellness that it has for our families and for the boys. But I think, stepping back, not fully separate from it, is, the greatest challenge for me is in this first year, where you go into the year thinking this is going to be a great opportunity to meet people. And obviously that has been an incredible challenge. And while I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of people, at the same time, it's not the same, right? It's not the same because, and I've been writing an article for publication for this fall, talking about bumping into people in the hallways, and how powerful those moments are in the life of a school, popping into classrooms, having lunch with people, breaking bread, and just not having those opportunities. I think it just makes it harder to build those relationships, and the relationships are really at the center of what we do. So, I would say overall that's been the greatest challenge. And at the same time, it sounds a little bit like a contradiction. You really get to know the school incredibly well in a crisis. You get to know kind of the ethos and the spirit of an institution. And I have certainly seen this firsthand as the collegiate community has rallied. And, despite all the obstacles, despite the challenges, despite the fears and anxieties that we all had heading into the school year, that we wanted to put the needs of the boys first, and their education, their scholarship, which I know is one of your core values, which I saw on your website. And so you learn the character of a community very quickly in a crisis. So that's been revealing, and I've appreciated seeing that grittiness. And I would say one final piece in terms of a reward of this year has been the opportunity to teach. I've taught a class this second semester, and I've missed it terribly, and I've always taught, but being able to be in the classroom with the boys has been just a wonderful gift, and another great insight into the school. And I'd love to hear the same from you and your experience of the rewards and the challenges. Maybe they're similar.
They are very similar. I think I'll start actually with the challenges. I agree with you. There was just so much. I think one thing that's distinct about our community is over 90% of our families are living below the poverty line. And so when COVID hit in March, when I was superintendent, and then even moving into the CEO role, we had families who were really suffering tremendously from job loss, or they didn't have the ability to move or go to a second home. They were in their apartments. There were multi-generational homes. And so what we saw was a lot of family stress. And I think as a community really came together to really think about and redefine what are the most essential elements of school that's most important. And that intense collaboration that happened really helped, I would say, strengthen our core values around ensuring that we were really putting equity first. And it's through conversations like this, understanding what was being offered at places like Collegiate and Nightingale, and how could we as a community do something similar or different. And so at the very beginning, it was really important for our families to have flexibility around their work submission, right? Because children had to share devices. They may or may not have had Wi-Fi. And we had to be understanding of what the family was going through, while also pushing through how important an education was. And I think the pivot from where we were in March and the spring of last year to where we started the year, where families trusted us and also wanted to make sure that their kids were getting the best education possible. And so they created environments to ensure whether they chose to be virtual or remote. I know you were lucky enough to open your doors. We were remote to start the year. And so that ability to pivot as a community, being able to walk together and really elevate our families as partners was just another lesson that we will take forward, because what we learned is when we empower our families and really listen, not only do they have ideas, but there's opportunity there for us to grow and get better. And this doesn't work when there isn't a partnership between families and schools. And so I think that's universal as a theme across charter school or an independent school, that in fact, we're all working in tandem to make sure that we are supporting our children the most. And I think in terms of opportunity, we really saw the opportunity to dive deep into social emotional learning. And as it relates to our boys, it was really a pivotal moment to start to understand all of the stress and trauma that they were witnessing, but also how to manage and navigate through those emotions during that time so that we could see the resilient young men that they've become a year later.
Yeah. Well, that could also be considered a reward. And I have been amazed at the resilience of the kids, the pivoting. We've had to go back and forth, and you have a case and you're quarantined and you're online. And I think the kids have been remarkable. Of course, the teachers, incredible as well. But I would also just echo the partnership. This has been a community effort. Everyone has had to step up at the school, at home, being patient, adapting. So I've really benefited from that and getting to know people that way.
Couldn't agree with you more. I love that idea of the small moments that you missed. There was always a birthday party going on in a school that you could count on. And those things have changed and shifted as we've gone through this year. But finding those opportunities, we've learned new ways to contactlessly touch children, right? Like we do a lot of fist bumps. Because we still need that connection. And I think that became really clear that community could exist virtually, but it was so much better in person. And so we fought really hard to make sure our kids could come back.
Great.
So you mentioned that Collegiate has been around for a little bit. Girls Prep opened our first campus in 2005, and Boys Prep, our flagship boys school, opened in 2014. So our oldest boys who started with us in first grade are just in seventh grade right now. And we know that there's a plethora of research and many proof points for an all-girls education, not as much, interestingly, around all boys models. But I am curious to hear your thoughts as a leader of a school that's been in the single-sex sector for generations. How do you create a unique experience for your students? What do you feel are the benefits of a single-sex education? And that prevalent question, is it still relevant to have an all-boys environment?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the answer to that one. It is very.
That was easy.
That's right. That's a softball. Well, I think it's important to answer that question in the sense that, we're a school of choice, like your charter schools are, and we're part of a pantheon of options, right? And single gender schools are not for everybody. There are all sorts of options that people can have out there. And I think it's important that this be an option if it's the right one for a particular boy. I noticed on your website, the first word in the values for Boys Prep is brotherhood. And that is a word that has great historical significance at Collegiate. And you will hear our alums from decades and decades ago speak about the brotherhood. I think that is a powerful piece. Again, not unique necessarily to an all-boys school, but the connections that they make, that you're able to make in this type of environment, I think is really important. In the first semester this year, when I was, brand new and we're in this, crazy environment, I was helping to proctor classes. And I remember sitting in an 8th grade math class, and thank goodness for those students. I was not teaching the math class. I'm a history person, but I was there to proctor. And I've described it as that class was all boy. It had everything that I remember from being a student. It had energy, it had wiggliness, it had academic engagement, it had a dash of competition that was healthy, that was good-natured. They were helping one another. There was humor. There was just a very much an all-boy energy in the room. And I think that permeates my school. I'm sure it's the case with yours. And it's a distinctive environment. I also think an all-boys school allows boys to become and to be their authentic selves. I think society can place certain expectations on being a boy and a man. I probably don't need to go over what those are. But in an all-boys school, and maybe some people don't realize this, is you can break that stereotype. You can try new and different things. You can stretch in different ways. And I think that you find a lot of support from your fellow students in a school like this. And again, I experienced that. There's a level of comfort in trying new and different things. And boys' schools, and maybe the word is misleading, but they're affectionate places. There's a lot of care and concern when you're in an all-boys environment. And I think that's such an important piece of it. And I wrote this to the collegiate community this past summer, very early on in my tenure. My head of school at Roxbury Latin, kind of a legendary school leader, Tony Jarvis, would always tell us he loved us. And he used the word love freely, liberally, all the time. And maybe the all-boy reaction to it in the moment is not quite what one would expect, but it's here, right? It's in your mind, and we always knew that he did. So I think there are great benefits to it, and I'm glad it's an option for people out there, and I'm glad that that's true for your school as well. Maybe you have similar thoughts in your setting.
Well, it's so good to hear that we're on the right track to being like the speck in the history of boys' schools. But I would concur, brotherhood is at the core of what we do. And we really try to create these environments that are warm and joyful and rigorous. And as you said, all boy. I think what I love about walking into our boys' schools is there's very quick feedback if something is working or not working in ways that are helpful to the teachers and staff members to say, like, I need to switch course. This discussion is too long. There aren't enough visuals. I need to get them off of the rug. I need to get them moving in ways that sometimes I wish our girls would speak up and say, right? Like they are actually sitting on the rug pretty quietly, waiting patiently, thinking about things in their head that they're not responding to. And so again, like I think this idea of being able to set higher heights, as we talked about, our classrooms are named after classroom namesakes. And so we have individuals who we can show, look at their life story, people like Tommy Kale and Lynn Manuel Miranda, who are our initial namesakes in first grade, to really show this idea of two people from distinct and different backgrounds coming together and forming a brotherhood that has supported many different opportunities in life, including Hamilton, and they both come back and visit with our boys, which we think is really special. So it's something that they can see and touch and feel. We also think about how to give them opportunities to see across careers. I totally agree with you that there's this opportunity as a boy, as we like to say with our girls, the smartest person in a math classroom is a girl. Well, the best artist is a boy, right? And so you can live life without stereotypes and boundaries within a single sex environment to explore What are the things that you are into? And I really feel that our job as educators is to help kids tune into what is your thing, right? To find your thing and what is your passion, and go do that and do more of it. Because when you find your passion, you can contribute to the world in ways that are new and different. And we try to ensure that we're offering those opportunities.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
talked earlier about social emotional. We hear all the time our principal, Dr. Kirkland, who himself went to Morehouse, but he tells the boys all the time that he loves them. And so it just really warmed my heart to hear that you remember what your headmaster said to you so many years ago. And I actually just sent him a text earlier today to just thank him for his presence, because it means more than we can share, right? Not just the idea that there is someone who looks like them. In fact, when we do teacher career week, there are many boys who dress up like Dr. Kirkland because they want to be just like him, the principal of the school in a bow tie. But they are also thinking about other pathways and careers as well, that are not traditionally gendered, which I think is pretty amazing and exceptional. Because again, what we want to send to children is the idea that we want you to dream big. We want you to have goals, and we want you to feel empowered that if you see a problem in the world, you have the tools to solve it and build community to change it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. And I'll just throw out there, because I know that you asked initially, and it's true, there's not a lot of research out there that can back this up. But one piece of research that I will share is when it comes to early education in boys, when it, particularly in regards to tracking, reading levels, when schools will start homogeneously grouping, boys will often be tracked lower at younger grade levels, often because of this is not an educational term, the wiggliness. It can be misinterpreted very early on. So I think having an environment that caters to that teaches to that recognizes it's part of where many boys are developmentally, actively, I think can help with their academic progress early on.
Couldn't agree more. And in fact, in our kindergarten, first grade, and pre-K classrooms, wiggle breaks is a thing.
Yep.
It is important. Recess is a thing. It is important. And again, I think many times people think charter schools are so focused on academics, but a holistic educational experience is so important for boys and girls, but particularly our boys. The physicality is really, really important. And the competition there, again, it's resonating with me of all the traditions that we have at our boys' schools that are different than our girls' schools, whether it's oratorical contest. Pi Day is a big thing. There's a belt that walks around the school. Who knows the most numbers on Pi Day and can recite them, and families are practicing. And there's a Pi Day champion who's been 2 years running and hasn't broken his streak, right? And so I think it's finding those opportunities to really celebrate who they are.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
I think I might have the next question. Well, I do. So we've talked about single-sex schools, but some of our boys have sisters or mothers or aunts or female teachers, or I don't know, there's this other sex in the world, right? Like females. And so the question becomes, as we think about the historic election of our first female vice president, even within a single sex environment, how do you think about the role that young men can play in supporting women's rights? And how is that reflected at Collegiate?
Well, I think they must play an important role. I don't think it's an option. And I think that an all boys school needs to be intentional about working with their students to raise the voices of all people, whether it's genders, whether it's anti-racism work that schools are doing, LGBTQ awareness and support. We are doing a lot of work this year, as many schools are, on issues of diversity, and equity and belonging here in our community, but that extends beyond, right? It of course relates to the world that they're going to enter. And so we are very intentional, whether it's the boys who have a feminist club, which they started. Black History Month this year was dedicated completely to Black women leaders. And that was run by the students. And every day throughout the month, all 28 days, I think it was this year, was an email in the morning highlighting the impact of a Black woman in our country. And then a wonderful presentation. And I know it goes beyond presentations. I mean, you said it in your question, it is the female teachers that they encounter, right, every single day in the classroom, and the administrators and other leaders here in our school. I think it's incredibly important that we are elevating all voices. And to go back to your prior question, I would never go so far as to say this work can be done better in an all-boys environment, but I think it'd be done very effectively for some of the reasons that we said earlier. Open conversation, authentic selves, asking questions. And I think that we all need to foster that type of environment. And then again, to your question, I think it's very important that we do this work in all boys schools. How about where you are?
Very similar. I would say that we started with our girls' schools first, but we're pretty firm in our belief that women's history is American history. It should be taught 365 days a year. So I'm very excited to hear how there were opportunities for boys to really have intensive experiences around what are the contributions of women, such that it's not just sort of limited to this small moment. It's actually part of the fabric of who we are as a country and in the world. I also think it's really important, and we've been thinking about this a lot in our schools, while we are trying to substitute out boys' interest in terms of books and literature, we also want them to read literature that has strong female characters. I mean, Amazing Grace is such an amazing story of a girl who is resilient and is really thinking about big ideas and big things. And we don't want to substitute that because we're a boys' school, and so we never read books about girls, right? And so what we want to do is create opportunities where women's voices are respected and also consulted, right? Not as an afterthought, but part of the conversation. And I think we try to do both with our girls' schools with the absence of boys, but also our boys' schools with the absence of girls. That the idea that the absence of the sex doesn't mean that they should be diminished, but in fact is an opportunity to explore more deeply what is the impact in the intersection that these two communities can have together. Because again, we believe that when there's this amazing quote, right? Like, we are really trying to ensure that we are not repairing broken men, but building strong, young, confident boys. And so that's sort of the idea by which we're approaching the work that we're doing with our boys.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'm learning about, obviously it's different in the time of COVID, is how we interact with the all girls schools. I know you spoke with Paul a few months ago, and he's great. And yeah, the pandemic has certainly changed what those occasions will be. But I think those are also opportunities, to your point, of ongoing basis, in ongoing interactions that will, open up dialogue. And so I'm eager to learn more about that, hopefully in a normal year.
And perhaps we could all come together and figure out how the three of us can work together between our girls and our boys. I think it would be incredibly powerful to think about making some bridges and intentionality there.
Do your schools interact in formal ways?
So not as much as we would like to. And so we've really tried to build up the interaction amongst our girls' schools, so they're not just separate campuses. But now we're thinking about what are the opportunities for our students to come together around similar topics. They are studying similar units, and that's just our next level of work. But we only started in 2014, David, so you have to give us a little bit of time. to come back to you on that.
Right, right.
I want to switch over to tips for parents. I know that we have a lot of families on the line, and I know that you have a son, Jacob. And so for all of the parents like yourself in the audience, what are the 3 tools or strategies that are utilized within all boys schools that can be used to promote the lessons we've talked about at home? And are there any specific lessons that you took home as your son was growing up?
Well, I should probably let Jacob chime in and say whether I should be giving parenting tips. He may have an opinion on that. Well, here's a few, and I don't know if it's exactly 3. I mean, one is, I think it's so important to offer a range of opportunities. And I think, but to be clear about it, it's a range of opportunities that is responsive to your son. And once you see a little bit of an opening, I think it's great to facilitate that. And it'll of course change as he gets older and interests change. But I think that range of opportunities, and not necessarily, putting them in stereotypical activities, if that makes sense. I think creating opportunities that promote a lot of listening. Dialogue with boys can be different. There's not, let me put it this way, sitting down and having a talk isn't always the case doesn't always work well with a boy. And so I think setting up opportunities, the old sort of playing catch, which is some of the greatest conversations that I had with Jacob. And you're throwing a ball back and forth, and you just start kind of talking. And I think a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions, not a lot of directing, I think is also really effective. And then the other piece, this is probably not just for boys, is just not to overparent. That desire to have independence, risk taking, that again, trying new things, as I said a second ago, and just kind of letting it be, can be very hard. I understand that. I've been there, but I think is really, really important. Couple of books that jump out, Julia Lithgow-Hames, How to Raise an Adult, incredible book, not just about boys, but I think has just wonderful advice in there. And then for parents of younger ones, Erica Christakis wrote a beautiful book called The Importance of Being Little. And I would highly recommend those. I'm sure there's other great books that you could recommend that have better parenting tips than I can offer.
Those were pretty good. I hope Jacob agrees. He'll let us know in the chat. I'm sure that he does. I don't have any boys. I do have a ton of nephews, and so I do have a sort of supportive role, being a great auntie. And I think the small things that I would add, the first is this idea of, and we hear it a lot with our boys at Boys Prep, teachers and mothers, like saying toughen up, right? Like this idea of like, you can't show your emotions and it's not okay to cry. And oftentimes we spend a lot of time talking to families about the symbiotic relationship between anger and sadness, right? And that for boys, many times sadness is actually manifesting into anger. And so really helping them understand, why are you feeling this way? What are you feeling? And do you want to keep that feeling or change it, is something that we're working really hard to do. And so we do encourage our parents often to sort of help break the gender stereotypes by not saying things like toughen up, because that's sort of saying to our boys, actually bottle up your emotions, when in fact we want them to be their full selves. And I think the second thing is just talking, as you said, talking to your kids in those small moments, because they are listening and they want to hear your perspective on how things are going and these choices that they're going to be confronted with. I think it's why our core values are so important, and what we try to impart to our families that, our core value of responsibility, this idea of doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, is something that's going to carry you through beyond the walls of boys prep and public prep schools.
Yeah.
And for us, right, like, what the right thing to do is. And sometimes you're confronted with choices that aren't the right thing. And you have to make decisions about, do I go to the right or do I go to the left?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really an important value. It's why our core values are so important. And being within a community that is loving and trusting is also so important. I'd love some of the book recommendations that you've given. I have to ponder some. I was thinking, what are some great books? But I'll come back to that in a few. We have a few questions from our audience in the Q&A. And the first is, this is actually a really good one. Do you think there's a higher ratio of male teachers in all boys schools versus female teachers in co-ed schools and all girls schools?
I'm going to guess at this. I would guess it's a higher number in boys schools. But at least in our school, we have more female teachers than male teachers overall. And I would probably, I'm not sure if I would apply that to other boys' schools. I wouldn't be certain of that. But I would guess there's a higher percentage. Is that true in your school?
Yeah, so in our schools, there's absolutely a higher percentage of male staff in our schools than our girls' schools. And they are attracted to our schools because it's an all boys school. And so there's just this affinity with the opportunity to, like you said, be in an environment that you understand, right?
Sure.
Just all boy.
Right.
And so we absolutely have a higher percentage of male teachers. And I think it's really important in the elementary grades. I mean, I remember being a leader of a co-ed school, finding a male first, second grade teacher, third grade teacher. Right? It was like finding a unicorn. Very different from middle school, high school, which tended to trend more male than the elementary levels. And so I actually think that's a great opportunity for our boys, that they are seeing so many different males, role models throughout their time. And there isn't just this, like, the one male teacher that everyone's writing you for. I don't know if you had that in Florida, the parent request, but they were fun. Second question that we have, let's dig a little deeper into social emotional learning and talk a little bit more about how you're fostering a sense of connectedness among students and faculty, and how you're partnering with parents to bolster your boys' social and emotional needs. I'm happy to share first if you want to.
Yeah, no, that's if you have something.
Yeah, so at Public Prep, as I shared earlier, we intentionally increased our advisory times and morning meeting times to 30 minutes this year in our school day. And so there were intentional moments where our boys could come in and have connections virtually first and in person with teachers to talk about their day, to talk about their feelings. We've also partnered with Ruler, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And so we've been using components of the mood meter, again, to label emotions and feelings and really sort of help our scholars build that emotional intelligence. And then we also do scenarios where we are thinking about decision making, certainly starting in 4th grade and up, around what does it mean to be a bystander? What does it mean to be a bully? How can we live out our core values? What if a friend has let you down? How do you have those conversations and repair the relationship? So we're doing a lot of work there. And one of the benefits of COVID is that we've been able to do these types of webinars with our families, where we can share what we're doing, because they can see us remotely because we're zooming into their houses now, but also partner around how to create consistency across home and school. And so We have at home, there are mood meters that students are using with their families to label their emotions. And families are also using our language around core values and thinking about positive incentives and reinforcements, which is really important versus first starting with a negative consequence.
Yeah, I would say we have similar type programming, when it comes to advisories. We don't use Ruler, but Ruler is great. So I think we have in place, particularly in normal years, explicit programming. I think the way that I would probably approach this question as well is we are really focusing, and we're doing some faculty PD around this, is on relationship building in sort of implicit ways. And I said this earlier about the hallway and bumping into kids in the hallway and the implicit curriculum and culture of the school. We had a wonderful session with Professor Joseph Nelson, who's at Swarthmore, who studies relationship building in boys' schools. And Janelle, I should introduce him to you.
Yes.
He's absolutely fabulous because there's a framework that he shares, very specific steps that teachers can take to build stronger relationships with the students in their classrooms and advisories and homerooms and so forth. We had a wonderful session with him a couple weeks ago. He's going to come back in 2 weeks as well to sort of follow up. And one of the assignments he gave us is for us to think about examples of a strong relationship we've had with a student and one that hasn't been as strong, and to kind of deconstruct both and really think very intentionally about that. I am a very strong proponent of the implicit curriculum of schools and what happens in the unstructured informal moments, because it really gets back to boys are subtle when it comes to, I really love what you said earlier about anger and sadness, right? It kind of two sides of a single coin. And boys won't necessarily say, I'm feeling sad right now. And so the adults in their life have to sort of kind of coax it out of them a little bit. So I think being very thoughtful about in the school setting is really important. So we're just going to continue a lot of work around that, and then make sure once we discover there's a challenge or a social emotional challenge that a child's having, then do we have the supports in place, working with people in the school and family, of course.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I think oftentimes we think of social emotional from even this negative connotation, but helping children understand, and this is what I love about Ruler, what makes you content is equally as important as understanding when you're sad or angry, because so much of our society is about consumption, right? Like the latest iPhone, the latest thing.
Yeah.
And part of this is, so you can't actually get happiness externally. At some point, it has to come from within. And so really understanding why finding your passion, I think, is so important. What makes you happy? What makes you content is the question that Aristotle and Socrates were asking many, many years ago. But it definitely is something that we want our boys and families to consider.
And I would just put this out there as I would suspect is going to be a big challenge for schools moving forward is relationship building, social emotional wellness, in regards to technology use. And it's something that is on my mind. This has been understandably a very technologically heavy year and a half. Been, of course, benefits to it, and it's been necessary. So I don't say that as a critic. And at the same time, when it comes to relationship building, I really take your point about contentment and consumption. So how we continue to manage that, I think, is going to be an important focus for schools.
I will just say personally, as a parent, one of the things that COVID taught me was sometimes overscheduling your children is not to anyone's benefit, right? And so when we were forced to pause, it was, so is this thing really the most important thing? or
Right.
was this about something else? And really getting back to the essentials
Yeah.
of what is important. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about, you mentioned some of the professional learning that your teachers have been involved in. How do you think that's different? What types of professional development have you been thinking about or doing with your staff that's different than when you were in a co-ed environment? What types of learning experiences do teachers and staff in all boys environments need that's critical to their success?
Yep. Well,
Big
one is,
question.
one is certainly under the umbrella of COVID, which was heading into this year, was a laser focus on online teaching. Not knowing heading into the school year whether we'd be online or if we'd have to go back and forth. And I would say that was done through and that all boys lens, knowing that you're going to have boys on the other end of a screen like we are right now. How do you keep them engaged? How do you let them keep moving? Had great conversations with our PE staff about that, if they were going to be remote, incredibly creative on how they were handling that. So really the learning piece was our focus heading into the school year, and how that was going to serve the needs of the boys in this incredible environment. And then, as I said, the PD this year has been less than I would like because of circumstances. But Joseph, who came in, again, his focus is on relationships with boys. So I think putting that front and center, and the work that he was doing with us, when there's been so much focus on just staying open, I think I'd like to think was welcome for our faculty to be talking about those pieces. Have you been able to do PD this year?
We have, and like you said, so much of it has been around reopening or just thinking about some of those protocols. But within Boys Prep, each of our teachers, we call them teacher leaders, are able to lead professional development. And so we've had a number of teachers doing their own independent research. So it's so nice to hear that there are professors thinking about all boys education and sharing articles and really thinking about more intentionality about how to plan lessons that are supportive of boys, and really thinking about, again, always what we like to say, what's in the locus of control of the teacher, right? And so timing, physicality, more visuals, more mnemonics, more music, really sort of integrated and incorporated to keep their attention, but also move the learning at a quicker pace. And we've also had a lot of conversations writ large across our boys' schools and girls' schools just around giving students more opportunities for leadership. They can do it. And so teachers are really holding tight on the reins, and we want to actually hear their voices more and hear their ideas more. And so we are still thinking about, and really starting with asking the boys, what is it that you want to see us do better in your schools, right? So that it's a place where you feel seen and heard and valued. But it's certainly a place where, again, if there are ideas, we'd love to partner and think more about that
That's
work.
a great opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we are, oh my goodness, this time has flown by, David.
It's almost an hour. Okay. Wow. That's been great.
And just like that, there's Sam.
Right on cue.
This is great.
Sam,
I appreciate it.
any key takeaways that you heard as an audience member?
Yeah. Well, first of all, a hearty thank you, Janelle, to both you and David for sharing your time with us, and obviously we're acutely aware of all of the things that you guys need to accomplish every day in the current environment, and we appreciate you taking the time to do this. I thought it was a terrific conversation. I'm really struck by how many similarities there are between an organization that is anywhere from 7 years old and slightly older, depending upon which school you're talking about in the public prep network, and a school that's nearly 400 years old, which is, I think, a credit to both the innovation that David brings to Collegiate and his perspective as a new leader, and Janelle, your ability to sort of pull from, kind of the classics, if you will, and recreate in the public prep environment, some of the traditions that may have existed in schools that are much older than our network. It reminded me, the conversation about the Wiggles sort of was I thought was great, and really reminded me when Nikki and I came to tour Collegiate maybe 9-ish years ago, when our first son was going through the process, and we looked into a room and there were like 6 boys on the floor, three boys rocking back in their chairs. Another one like had a tennis ball in his hand. And we knew we had a wiggly boy in our first one. And the two of us looked at each other, we're like, this place gets like what we're looking for, for our child. So that brought back, a lot of memories for us. And when you go to the boys prep school, you see the same thing. And we went to other schools where that wasn't allowed, and that was sort of, noticeable. And so you kind of have to know your children and know your institution. And I think the other takeaway for me is it really reinforced for us, as an audience member, the importance of the single school, environment. I believe in it. My children are obviously in single-sex schools. We have a girl in a single-sex school as well. We're believers. And from the boys' school perspective, I really liked the concept of brotherhood that you both brought out, and that's really a core part of how you think about your mission. And in conclusion, I would say, as I listened to this, it just really made me quite proud to be associated with both institutions, and to be associated with both of you as leaders of those institutions, and really appreciate all the hard work that you're both doing. And while I've had a chance to break bread with Janelle over the years, and we'll see each other actually in person tomorrow for the first time in a long time, David, I look forward to having the opportunity to do that with you, hopefully in the not too distant future.
That'd be great. So thank you very much for this opportunity to engage in the conversation, and it's a real honor, and we have great opportunities to work together.
Yeah, it'd be great to find areas where there's, cross ideas.
The ideas are already sparking, David.
Part of this is to create a relationship between the schools and between you guys as leaders to, let the thoughts start to percolate and kind of use best practices across the institutions and things of that nature. So thanks again.
I'll introduce you to Joseph through email, Janelle. I promise. You love him.
Thank you. I appreciate that, David. Sam, thank you so much for wrapping up and closing for us. As always, if you want to get more involved with public prep, there are many different ways, even in the virtual setting. Hosting mystery readers for read alouds with our boys. That's actually in person with their mask on. One of the things we love is their personalities come through in masks. There are also ways to get involved through financial support, whether it's helping us upgrade a classroom library or just making a gift, as we are trying to build world-class schools for all of our boys and girls that rival the educational experience at Collegiate and Nightingale, and doing amazing things for our scholars in the Bronx and the Lower East Side. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We hope that you have learned as much as I have more about the state of all boys schools and how you can help your sons and nephews be their full selves in this world and in their communities. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.